This podcast was brought to you in association with Juggernaut. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today we'll be talking about Money Wise, Timeless Lessons on Building Wealth, a book written by Deepak Shenoy. Deepak is easily one of the most popular portfolio managers in India as he manages and is the CEO of CapitalMind based out of Bangalore. And the fact that I loved about this book being something as that I'm involved in the world of finance and have read a few books on personal finance. One of the most interesting things that I found was the fact that Deepak is candid, super direct, to the point, and makes interesting yet complex topics super accessible to its readers. I don't really want to spoil a lot, so let's jump right into the interview. Hi Deepak, welcome to the Kitabi Karwan podcast, and I'm so glad to have you on. I've been following your work apart from your book also, and once your book came out, it was something that I was just too keen on reading, and luckily Juggernaut provided me this opportunity. So, Deepak, I'll just give you about 30 seconds to a minute to just quickly let our listeners know of what your book is about and what you intended to do with it.
Thanks, Siddharth. It's great to be here as we've been trying to connect on this for a while, and I want to share a lot of the things that I've got in the book. I'm Deepak Shenoy. I work for a company. I founded a company called CapitalMind. We are a SEBI-registered PMS. So a lot of the stuff that has come as I've written in the book is largely from experience. And it's about, the book is called Money Wise. It's essentially a way to start your investing journey from the very basics, go from first principles of what you might want to do in your investing process, how to shape your investing into thoughts into stocks and mutual funds and all the other investments that you might come across, and a framework of how much money you might actually need to build in order to be able to kind of live a reasonably good life. So I mean, it's not a book that says, oh, well, buy this and you're done for life and that kind of stuff. I think, I leave it to other people to do that. I think I'm more of, listen, this is very boring, so let me try and make it less boring for you guys. And pepper it with anecdotes and fun stuff that makes it more interesting to read.
Right. That is something I can attest for. It was a really fun read. And given the fact that I work in finance, so even then it felt not like a book that, well, it's too basic for me to read. It was just a fun read to kind of read from others' experience and get it. But Deepak, I'm curious about this. Okay. And I know it's a strange question to ask on a podcast which revolves around books, but why a book? In the sense that a topic like personal finance, and it has pros and cons, of format of a book, but there's videos and podcasts and millions of other ways of kind of propagating the same information, and probably maybe in a better way. So what kind of prompted you to write this book?
It's interesting. I think why the book is, a book is a very different format. So I've written long form, short form content for, I think now 20 years. We have done podcasts, we've done video casts, we have a YouTube channel, a lot of things around this. A lot of things that go along with the writing is the learning in terms of building this out. But I never stretched this out into a format that would say, well, you know what, start from the beginning, go to the end, and you'll end up with something interesting at the end of it, instead of taking each individual blog post that I have written for the last 20 years and putting that together as a book, which would have been interesting because we've written a lot of interesting stuff over the years. I instead said, let's and my publisher actually, Chiki at Juggernaut, she told me the world needs a very beginner level book. So a lot of the stuff we write is a little more, let's say, more difficult to understand if you're not already in finance. So it was a challenge for me to kind of see if I could write for an audience that is perhaps starting out and hopefully has the enthusiasm and yet is feeling a little intimidated about market. So try to build it in a manner that makes it less intimidating, more easy to understand
Right.
in that format. The book is an interesting format. I think audiobooks are a merger of a book and a podcast.
Mm,
The problem with books is, of course, they get outdated. So the
mhm.
information you give might not be valid 4 or 5 years later. And the old traditional cycles of publishing new editions has
Yes.
been changed in this world of podcasts and video casts and edits and all that stuff. So
Mm,
yeah, we have to adapt to all of that at some point. Maybe there'll be new additions, but
mhm.
I think right now we actually have a very interesting first level of a book, and hopefully there'll be more either books or content that comes in that feeds off of what I've written as well. So
Mm,
it's difficult to write one, and the COVID lockdowns gave me the ability to sit down and write, but
mhm.
it's incredibly difficult to you actually write 100,000 words and then you bring it down to that 30, 40,000 that you need for the actual book. So it's
True.
mostly chipping away at what you've written. That's the difficult part.
Right. And I think a lot of it might also come from the fact that you've been so experienced with, well, finance. You manage like you do run a portfolio management service yourself. So distilling becomes difficult, I'm assuming. I mean, I might be very wrong here, but everything might feel very important enough to like keep in the book, and what do you cut out and things like that. And I can actually agree with your publisher on the front that there's an actual, like, very severe need for a book, or I know, introduction to personal finance. And this is one of those things that keeps going. I mean, I know you're active on Twitter, so you might have seen this. It's one of those things that, oh, algebra never helped. Find mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell never helped me, but maybe personal finance or taxes in school might have. And that's true. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, and I know a lot of my friends who struggle with personal finance. I know MBAs who are struggling with personal finance, which is mind-boggling at best. So, in that sense, the book is a very well-needed book. So, so Deepak, when you started writing the book, right, was your purpose to just, I know, present information in a particular way and let people take matters into their own hand, or was it to nudge people in certain directions, like not I don't mean to say that nudge towards your PMS, but in terms of say if you are a particularly risk savvy investor, right? Like maybe you're okay taking 90% allocation to equity and maybe the rest in other things. So how do you was there this intention in the first place to kind of maybe let your biases through? If not, how did you kind of trim them back from the book, right? Because it's very difficult to take a completely neutral stance on when you're talking about something like this.
No. So, I mean, all books in effect are marketing because you don't
Yeah.
make money from books unless you're like that 1.5% of the population that
Hmm.
actually gets like massive bestseller books and all that stuff.
Hmm.
You will, at best, make a very modest amount of money
Hmm.
writing a book. So, the purpose of any book, and I say this quite shamelessly, is to market either the author's knowledge or
Right.
build some kind of a framework around thinking that and to a lot of people, including to me, writing is an honor. So
Hmm.
the fact that I'm able to write and other people are able to read is a big honor. So it feels good having just been published as a book
Right.
author. So the motivations there therefore are always selfish.
Hmm.
There's no
Hmm.
concept of a selfless attitude here, but
Hmm.
in effect what I'm trying to do here is two things: dispel myths, because a lot of people come in with predefined notions around, oh, this is good, that is good, real estate is good, gold is good,
Right.
stocks are volatile, therefore bad. I
Right.
should save more, I should save early. All of these are
Right.
myths, and you can
Right.
eliminate them in multiple ways. You can give cogent arguments towards them or
Right.
against them. But you can also prepare data. So I talked about, for instance, why people run after equities saying, acha, 10% returns and 11%.
Hmm.
It doesn't do me any good for people to not chase equities because we're an
Right.
equity based fund manager. But I tell people, you don't have to chase equities.
Right.
Because even if you put your money into a 6%, 7% dollar fixed deposit over a
Hmm.
long term, you
Right.
might actually make more money than the person who's doing equities, because you know what, you'll put more money in because you think it's safe. And if you put more money, just put a little more, 10% more every year.
Right.
That is enough to counter someone else who has just
Right.
put money into equities but did not do this 10% more, simply because they felt troubled by the volatility of the whole thing. So
Right.
behavior is a bigger thing, a bigger challenge in our industry than returns or management or anything like that. Your own emotions, your greed, your fear, your panics, and all of the internal stuff that goes inside your head matters more to your investment portfolio and how it does than actual stock selection or which sector did well and all that stuff. That is all like 20% of the whole thing. It's your emotional reactions that drive most of it. So the book is actually designed around trying to tell people about how you face or deal with these kind of things, which are the softer kinds of the investment process,
Right.
and putting a framework around it. So most people are like, listen, I don't care, just tell me how much is enough. But how much is enough varies according. So you kind of work a calculation method to say, if you spend so much today, it doesn't matter how much you earn. You can earn any amount, but what matters is more about how much you spend. If you spend so much today, what are you likely to spend X number of years down the line, assuming there's an inflation of say 5%? And you want to be able to meet that expense with your corpus whenever you retire. And then not just that expense, because that would be year one. You want to go on to meeting year 2, year 3, year 4, which also inflates at 5% a year, doubling every 15 years roughly. So you effectively have to meet all this corpus. You have to have enough of a corpus that meets all these expenses all the way till the time you die. And if you die at say 90 or 95, you got a plan to live that long. So you need a certain amount of money. So there's a way to calculate it, and then there's a simple formula. 30 times your annual income until your age of 50. Before your, whatever your expenses are today, you're going to need 30 times that. Is the corpus, the annual expenses, to meet the same lifestyle at the age of retirement, assuming you have roughly 5% inflation. So you put all of these metrics in place. You put, how do you invest? Do you invest all at one time? Do you invest certain amount in equity, certain amount in debt? How do you divide between the two? So I put in a framework that said, well, you know what? First, take care of your hygiene. Your hygiene is the basics. The very basics are insurance, health insurance for yourself, an emergency fund that covers 6 to 10 months of expenses, simplified format of understanding how much you need to cover in terms of insurance for yourself if you have family members that need to be supported in case you die. Otherwise, you shouldn't even take insurance. And health insurance for in case you don't die, when something bad happens. So that's the hygiene part of things. Then there's what you might want to call the compulsory part of things. You will retire at some days. You got to build a corpus for yourself. You will, if you have children, they will go to school and college, and you have to plan for those expenses. There's a way to plan for those. So you plan for those things. This is going to happen regardless of what happens to me, because if I die, I have insurance. If I live and I'm healthy, then I need some money to live, right? So that the planning for that becomes your core planning influences. And the last thing is, of course, you got money for growth and plan and things that you want to really risk your life on. And this is where I say you don't have to invest this extra money. You can actually spend it, because if you've taken care of your core and your hygiene, why do you need to invest more money? Just go spend it. Spend it on stuff that you didn't think you'd spend it. Like I don't know, front seats at the French Open in case you're a tennis fan, or go to the FIFA World Cup whenever it happens. It's an expensive 1 month, 1.5 month proposition, but if you plan enough for it, and you've taken care of your other goals, then you don't need. The book actually goes through this. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should invest in equity. I would like people to, because that helps me, but it's just not for everybody. and you
Yeah.
shouldn't force people who don't like it or aren't comfortable with it to invest in it, because then you'll just get a bunch of really angry people when markets go down, like they're going down today nowadays. And you get a bunch of people who are like, oh my god, I never knew. I mean, of course, markets going up is not our birthright. People think, or have been thinking recently, that the markets going up is like a birthright, right? So
Mm.
the COVID time frame, markets went down, but they recovered very fast. It was only about 3 months,
Right.
to the point where if you look at annual returns, you wouldn't even think 2020 was a COVID year,
Right.
because the annual returns are positive and they ended up fairly reasonably positive. I think more
Right.
than 12-13% in the year.
Right.
And interest rates fell down to a considerable extent. So you didn't have a choice. Your FDs were giving you 5.5%.
Mm.
Even still are, to be
Right.
honest. Your FDs are terrible returns.
Right.
There was no other place to hide. So you put your money into equities, you saw it go up. A couple of years down the line, now you're starting to see some kind of correction. And this correction piece is actually very nasty. And the
Mm.
nastiness of it is that it is a sustained long correction from October 2021 to June 2022, more than 8 months. We
Months.
have seen a sustained down. I mean, the market hasn't broken its highs for 8 months, which is fairly common if you have lived long enough in the markets. 8 months of no new high is very common, but we
Right.
haven't seen this for 2 years, because you saw a high coming up every
Right.
few months. Now, given this, I think the expectations of people who went into equity, who were largely debt investors, happy with
Mm.
real estate or fixed deposits, who went into money in equity simply because there was no other choice, they are the ones who are panicking and exiting right now and saying, getting angry with the markets or
Mm.
frustrated with them. The people who are long-term investors are understand that the pain is temporary
Right.
and things will move as slowly. I mean, they will not move fast.
Mm.
You got to Putin, you got China, you got all sorts of those are just
Right.
excuses. The market just needs time to breathe. And uh, when you're in that kind of a situation, you find out whether a person is built for an equity exposure or not.
Right.
The less questions you're asking about this time, the more likely you are built for an equity market.
Yeah.
Uh,
So that's
so,
why interesting that you brought this up, this final bit, because that actually leads me to the next question I had in my mind. That COVID was a black swan event, right? Like no one expected it. It came out of the blue. My personal anecdote about it is that when COVID was building up, like December 2019, right? It's COVID-19, although it hit majorly in 20. I was preparing for the UPSC exam back then, and we used to have these GK modules to like revise, right? So
wow.
about like a few, I've left that world behind a while back, but sometime last year I just somehow came across one of those modules from January 2020. So it was a revision module for December, and COVID was just one line. Like, it was just, there's this new virus that's been detected in China. And in terms of how much how we don't know about things or where the future lies, this was one of those perfect anecdotes, right? One line in December, and suddenly it just changes everything. So my question actually was, uh, given your experience in personal finance and like managing your own or for other people, how much has COVID, like, and not, I don't just mean the virus, but how things played out during the pandemic, what kind of funds people needed. How has that experience, if at all, changed the way your opinion or your theory of personal finance is, like whatever framework you want to design? And like accordingly, how would you say that? Are there any updates that you made to the book which you probably would not have done in, say, a book that was in 2018 about personal finance?
So actually, if you ask me, I would say that my opinion about personal finance has not changed at all. In fact, it's the same. It's just got reinforced, because
Mm-hmm.
I was the one who was telling people all the time to build up an emergency buffer, and
Right.
people didn't have that. So it's then that they found out, oh, you need one.
Right.
I've been talking about, and I've been talking about this for a long time, saying, you need to plan for your retirement, to plan for an early retirement if possible or if feasible. You
Mm.
need to plan for money for your children's education, and things change dramatically. uh, Things have changed dramatically, but I find that the and this book was written through COVID, so it probably
Mm.
had a lot of influences in COVID itself, driving the reaction. One of the things I really think that people, you know, that I've changed my mind about is that people are not rational.
Mhm.
So you have to plan for extreme irrationality. I think a lot of the lockdowns that we've had are very irrational.
Right.
We even, I don't know, we banged plates at one point, and we did all sorts of drama. And it's not, when you look back at it, you're like, what were we thinking?
Thinking.
But it seemed logical or whatever. It's like, whatever works, man, let's do this.
Mm.
And because of that, I feel that, the world should now increasingly get prepared for more illogical reactions across the globe. A WHO recently, uh, a bunch of African countries rejected an amendment that would have allowed the WHO, the World Health Organization, to determine health policy in any country. Literally saying that WHO can say, you guys need to quarantine your people.
Right.
You need to have a lockdown. You need to not import from this other country because it has a quarantine. And the WHO is basically overtaking, politically
Everyone.
elected leaders, because they
Right.
feel that a pandemic is a world situation. And of course, the African countries were like, dude, I'm going to reject this because you guys started COVID.
Right.
When COVID started, it
Mhm.
was the African countries that banned tourists from Europe,
Mhm.
which is amazing because usually Europe is the one that bans tourists from Africa whenever there's an outbreak of a disease. So the African countries are like, excuse me, you guys are not going to tell us how we are going to
Yeah,
live our lives.
right.
You don't know the first thing about anything that happens with pandemics. We
Right.
do. So if anything, Africa should be writing the rules, not
Not
India or Europe
other.
or not
Right.
America. So I think this kind of illogical reaction happening now in 2022 after a crisis which the WHO got wrong in the first place.
Mhm.
They said it's not a pandemic, it's not from China, it's not going to infect, it isn't transmit through air. This was the initial. So everything about this whole reaction, according to me, has been illogical right from the beginning. We've had schools shut down. Why do Indian schools shut down because of pandemic? No Western school has. Uh, and yeah, you can argue that they have great medical facilities and all that stuff. But guess what? As a percentage of anything that has happened, all of these years, all of the last 2 years, the number of children that have died in India as part of this pandemic is fractions of anything that would have happened anywhere. It is just built like that. It's the whole virus right from the beginning was a virus of people who were vulnerable. It was harming people who were vulnerable more than it was harming. So a lot of the reactions, in spite of us knowing all this stuff, has been very illogical. I think we should expect more such illogical reactions.
Okay.
For instance, illogical reactions of the order of, oh, it's perfectly fine for America to invade Iraq, but if Russia invades Ukraine, the whole world needs to shut down. Uh, it's an illogical reaction if you think of it in the context of, wait, we didn't do
Right.
all of this drama when you guys invaded Iraq.
Right.
Why are we doing all this drama now? But we have to do the drama because it's happening. And more such illogical reactions will happen. Therefore, you have to
Right.
plan your finances in a way that you say, listen, I can't have all my money in one country. I got to I have to have my money in maybe multiple
Right.
countries. And India allows that to happen.
Right.
Multiple of the specific investing goals, opportunities, concepts have to be done in order to diversify yourself. You,
Right.
for instance, you shouldn't buy gold. Why?
Mhm.
Because you know what? We just had Ukraine, a
Mhm.
war. We
Mhm.
just had another COVID bout in January this year. We also had a China shutdown because of COVID. And guess
Mhm.
what? Gold is lower than it was in January, which
Right.
sounds dumb because we've had a war, a literal war where people have died. And
Mhm.
yet gold has not gone up. Inflation has hit 8% in the US, a 40-year high, and yet gold has not gone up. So gold is no longer a place to hide. So all of
Mhm.
these, the illogical reactions and the way asset classes have reacted to crisis makes me believe that you got to change the rules of the game, though the overall superstructure that you have to retire, you have to have enough money, you have to have an emergency fund, all of those continue to apply. It's just that where you keep your money might change. I still like equities more than any other place, as a place to hide. But I also feel that the only way the world will progress now is through technology. And only technology will help us solve illogical reactions, although it will also help us create illogical reactions and spread them around. So
Right.
new
So,
world, new way to
a new way to be illogical. I think, but that's a great takeaway to have. Like that, the world's far more illogical than one can ever imagine it to be. So your preparedness has to be according to that. And although I have a few more questions about this, I'm actually going to take a step back and move towards the writing process of this because, so I've interviewed a lot of writers and authors, translators, editors on the podcast, and almost all of them have had different stories or different ways of working or writing their book down. Like, I mean, you have some, the classic Hemingway style, just writing it down whenever they feel right, let the words express themselves, which is largely more on the fiction side. I understand that. And I understand that non-fiction writers also have like more structured approach to things. So I want to know what your approach has been, right? Has it been one of structure or, I don't know, nuance, where you just make a plan, you sit down for a fixed amount of time and write? Or is it just anecdote after anecdote? Or I don't know, do you sit every day, random times, do idea hai wo likha? How does it go? Any interesting insights into what your writing process is?
So I think everybody writes the way they like to write. It doesn't necessarily come out as easily for somebody to just adopt to somebody else's style. But I prefer to write when I feel like. I write often when I feel like it. So, but since I write so often, it is very easy for me to get down, sit and say, I got an idea, let me start writing.
Mhm.
And I don't. I mean, sometimes I go through lots of writer's block issues which happen. So I don't proofread the stuff I write when I write them. I tend to proofread them only maybe months later, because I go back and say, well, you know what, I wrote the same joke twice once because I
Hmm.
forgot that I had written the same joke earlier. It was the editor that caught it and said, "You said this before," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I had no idea." Then I had to do a Control F and search and all that stuff.
Right.
But so because writing is a disjointed process for me, it's therefore not structured. It isn't like, oh, I'm going to write this chapter today. But at some point, you started off, you weaved a structure together. You said, okay, this is what I'm going to write here. This is what I'm going to write there. You
Mhm.
plug it around, get some ideas, start building it, put a basic thing. So I wrote only 5 chapters. So it was very easy for me because I knew what 5 chapters I want to write. And I just went through each of them. However, the problem that I had was that I had already written a bunch of material before. So I had to
Okay.
figure out what parts of those material I could use and maybe
Okay.
enhance and write in a better way. And what parts of those material, or what parts of the book that I had to write from scratch. So
Right.
roughly maybe 30 to 40% of the book is reused material over the time which
Okay.
I've kind of written. And another 60% is something I wrote specifically for the book, including charts and data and putting things together and so on.
Right.
So it took some time to get all of this together, but I'm a very unstructured person. I don't do well with structure. You can't put me in a room and say start writing. It's just not going to happen. Writing is a creative art for me. I can speak
Right.
impromptu on almost any subject, but you start putting me in a room and say start writing, I'll be like, no. You know what?
Mhm.
I think a lot. I'm the kind of guy who will be like, you sharpen the axe for 20 hours
Yes.
and you bring down the tree in two, so that
Right.
you spend 90% of the time thinking of how you want to write and what part of it and how you want to build the story and weave it together. And
Right.
then the writing part is easy. I could get 3,000 words done in less than an hour.
Oh
It
wow.
is
Oh wow.
it's really
That's
easy for
impressive.
me to write 3,000 words in an hour. I could write
Right.
600 words in 15. I've done articles of 600 words in 10 minutes. That's not difficult. It's like, there's this old joke about this guy who, there's a big motor, $1 million motor that stops working, and they call this really old technician. Says, you're the only guy who knows how this stuff works. Can you take a look? So he looks around, he looks and says, I need a spanner. gets a spanner and looks at a nut and tightens it a little bit and says, start the motor now. And this motor starts. And then, he asks him, this guy asks him for how much will you charge me? I says, $1,000. And he says, wait, that's a lot of money. Why are you charging me $1,000 just to tighten a nut? Can you give me a line-wise summary of your bill and why it cost me $1,000? So he says, okay, I'll give you a line-wise summary. He sends him a bill. Just 2 lines in it. Tightening of nut, $1. Knowing which nut to tighten is the $999, right? So it's not about the writing. It's about how the shaping of it has to come from your mind. And that's going to be the one that, so you write, you do a little bit, you throw it away, you don't like how it's working, and you like, because most of the time you don't like, your own, the way you've written something. So then you refine it a little bit. So that's why I don't proofread. I just delete and start all over again. If I don't like what I've read, what I've written, I don't like the tone of voice, or maybe the words that I've used are too complicated, then I go back. So the process evolves through itself. And I've never tried to add a lot of structure into it. I find it very boring to add structure. So
yeah, just taking it forward from there, like this is a very interesting thing that you spoke about. The way that you write, that is, there's no structure, but you don't write. If you don't like something you read, you just delete it back. So is there any particular anecdote about you as a writer that we can take away? I mean, I'll just quote, I mean, the last thing that I heard was there was this writer who would write fiction, of course, but she would like to sit in a room alone and read out her work, but in different voices of each character, just to get a feel of what it is, right? So is there anything quirky that you do that way?
shucks. Okay, my biggest problem is I can't write the properly. Okay, so my biggest, if you see anything with HTE written, where the word the should come, that's me, most likely. Because I do it and I don't correct that ever. And it's like my pet thing. And so I love writing short sentences, one word sentences, complete obliteration of grammar wherever I feel that grammar is optional. All that I'll forgive, at some level, but I can't get that HT thing going away. So that's who I am. And people have asked me, is HT like an acronym of something and all that stuff? But no, it's just I just forgot. And everybody that I know who's read my pieces as well comes back to me and says, I know it's you, man. It's so I ignore the HTs. Even people who are like, obsessive compulsive about these things have kind of learned to give up on that. So that's the only thing I have. Otherwise, anecdotally, writing it's like breathing. You hardly have anecdotes about breathing unless you've been in a nightmarish situation where you had to hold your breath and all that stuff. I haven't had that kind of a situation with the writing in any meaningful way. So the inspiration for writing comes in the weirdest forms. Sometimes you think of something when you're having a conversation with somebody. I go back and say, dude, you know what? I'm going to stop talking to you right now because I need to write this idea down. It's just too good to let go. And then people looking at you strangely saying, "Ye kya hai?" And because I've got that idea and I know that was a missing link that I needed to piece something together, which has been going around my mind for like 15 days. And then it's that word, like today somebody came and told me the word lumpy. And the minute he said that, I knew that was what I was looking for in a certain context. So I was like, I need to write it down. So I've actually got a notepad with the word lumpy on it so that I remember what that context
it's a very Sherlocky thing, like just someone does something or says something and just something clicks and everything just joins, the puzzle comes together.
Joins together, yeah. That's how it happens. So I mean, I don't have any anecdotes. I wish I did. I was kidnapped by I don't know, fireflies.
The HT bit was good enough. I think That's, I think, for your next book or like next articles or anything that you write, maybe you can include like 3 different versions of the, like, as Easter eggs, like
Yeah.
HT, the, and like ETH, or
Yeah.
just for
No,
as
the
for fun.
TEH doesn't work for me. Somehow
Acha.
TEH just reads wrong, but HT just reads like dirt to me. Somehow my
Right.
eye misses it, completely. So.
Happens. So, Deepak, now I'm just going to take a step back from the writing process as well and focus on you as a reader, because that's something in my experience I've come across, that 99% of the writers are compulsive readers as well. Like, they love to read, and it's something like the same thing about the acts, right? It's just a way of perfecting the art that you're getting into. And obviously, because you're a fund manager, like, I mean, managing a PMS, and that requires a lot of reading in itself to build your knowledge base, which you have a very deep, uh, con- I don't know, ocean of. So, have you always been a reader? Like, was it like your parents got you into reading, or what? Did you just develop an affinity for reading? And what kind of books do you generally read? We'll get to finance, on finance, and everything later. But just in general, Deepak as a person, what does he read, and why does he read?
So I've been an avid reader, I think, since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So big fiction in the early parts of life, but also non-fiction, different types of non-fiction. So I don't know if anyone is, so a lot of people are not aware of some of these things. Also, so there is there's fiction of the type like Louis L'Amour, which is Western, you know, the Wild West wala fiction. Always very fascinated, not because. So the interesting thing about Louis L'Amour's writing is all the places he describes are real. The names are different. That's all. So you end up visualizing places very, very interestingly because of the way they're written. And then there's a Frederick Forsyth who takes this into another degree because the way he describes things, you realize that you can literally see almost every part of it, including, let us say, the stripes and the folds of a curtain that are in a room that, because he would have mentioned it in passing somewhere. So that is one layer of reading that you kind of do. But then I read a lot of non-fiction. So from, I guess, stories about people traveling. There's a book called All the World is a Spittoon. Very interesting book of a guy who decided that he won't take a single aeroplane and travel from the UK back to India. So he went from the UK, took a ship to Norway, went across through Sweden, Finland, Russia, went across to Siberia, went through Mongolia, China, Tibet, and then India, Nepal, and then India. So quite interesting because he did the whole journey on foot without actually even having some of the requisite visas. Quite interesting that he did that at the time. And Indians are not actually allowed to enter Tibet. So he did a few legal things there as well. But it was quite interesting because it's a fascinating set of books. There's Bill Bryson, if you like travel, good writer. Dave Barry, if you like humor. A lot of finance books, but most of my writing has been shaped by people like Dave Barry or Bill Bryson or people. Even for instance, in India, Shashi Tharoor's writings. There's a book on the Mahabharat. It's called the Great Indian Novel, which is Mahabharat. Great India is that. So, but it was built. It is the Mahabharat with the actors as the Indian political players. So Shakuni was X and Dhritarashtra was Y, and so he's put the Congress parties because the Congress was the ruling party for that time. So it's built around the history of Nehru and this thing. I put that into the context of the Mahabharata, and kind of it's a very interesting way to write. It's very difficult if you're not. I mean, I like the reading, so writing, but it's not humorous. It's a little more dry in that sense. But so then there's that, and then there's the insinuation based humor, innuendo based humor, which is very different. So from a Wodehouse, where I think the books are fascinating, the way they're written. And some of the sentences kind of make you look back and say, dude, I want to write a sentence like that.
Yeah.
To something more in your face, like a Khushwant Singh, where you might find that the language is just up there in your face. So it's just different ways that you write. But I mean, I read a lot. I would have I probably have maybe 1,000 books in my house. And because of me, the kids are also crazy about reading. So we have enough books for crazy
Right.
for crazy amounts of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
That's
also have a
actually very
book
inspiring. Yeah.
bookshelf
Sorry.
that I haven't read. So
I think all of us do. I think it's called an anti-library, and it's a very like there are those philosophical pieces on how your anti-library should be. So I mean, it's I think a very important part of every reader's life. I guess
correct.
it's reads that say. But Deepak, we're running out of time, so I just have one last question for you before we wrap this up. Right? Just speaking about reading, and you mentioned a bunch of books and of different genres, but and I'm not going to ask you for your favorite books, but what I'm actually going to ask you are like a few books or one, whatever suits your fancy, which has really impacted you as a person. It may be professionally, it might be personally, it might not be the best book you've read objectively, right? In terms of, as you mentioned, like some of Voda's sentences are ones which you aspire for, but just things that have shaped the way you look at the world or the way you look at your profession or the way you do things. I know it could be anything. It's just a free for all. Any books or a book if it has one of yours.
Well, there is a series of book by Terry Pratchett, the Discworld
Okay.
novels.
Okay.
It's very deep if you find meaning in them. So
Okay.
it's like Catch 22. Catch 22 is an amazing book by Joseph
Mm,
Heller.
mm,
I don't think Joseph Heller has written a book of that magnitude ever again. Though I've read some of the other stuff, it's not nowhere as good. But that is another book where every sentence kind of makes you and say, okay, this is like complete by itself.
mm.
Uh, Terry Pratchett makes some incredibly interesting statements. I mean, so it kind of stays with you for a while. And one of the statements is, there are lots, but I'll tell you one which I remember distinctly. He says, if the past is visible and the future is not, then we're actually walking through time facing backwards. So it's quite interesting because
Yeah.
it sounds better than saying we're driving through life with our eyes on the rearview mirror, though that is also a similar way. But I thought the analogy of this was
Was
brilliant. You're
better
walking
frame.
backwards walking through time facing backwards. And I think this, and he makes these statements casually when random two people are talking, and you're like, dude, that deserves a blog post by itself. But
Mm,
it's nice, and he doesn't labor upon it, just leaves it there and then carries on something. So I like that. I think those are things that I don't know if any book has made a meaningful difference to my life. I'm too shallow for all of that. So
mhm.
I read and devour books. I like the depth in a lot of them, but I don't necessarily attach a lot, as in, I don't think I've read a book that has changed my life yet.
Okay.
And I've read a lot of books. I find uh, uh, books are great stories. When they tell you stories, they're great. If they don't tell you stories, they're textbooks. And that's why I like books with stories. So I read a lot of books. I learn a lot from them, but I don't necessarily give them that much importance that they will change my life. So I continue to have a lot of the books I read because I sometimes like to read them again, but I won't call anything a favorite book because I think every book has its charm for me. And you know, some people would swear by say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. At some point, I thought that was the best book in the world, the
Mhm.
best set of books in the world. But
Mhm.
um, after that, I read a bunch of other books which were even better, and whether it was Terry Pratchett or Bill Bryson or Dave Barry or Even in the financial world, I read very little in the book format. I read mostly internet articles and data and stuff like that. But I find it fascinating that people continue to write books of the variety that the kind that provide a lot of stories. So there's a guy called Roger Lowenstein
Mm.
who's written a lot of very interesting finance books and non-finance books. He's written a book on Warren Buffett. He's written a book on there's a crisis called the LTCM crisis in 1998. Very interesting because he makes it a story, kind of
Mhm.
weaves through the story, tells you what people are thinking at the time. The best I think that I've read in that is a book called What Goes Up.
Mm.
I forget the name of the authors, but it's only a bunch of dialogues that two people are having, or two people from different times, from the 1940s to the 1970s to the 80s and all that stuff, around how the US financial industry evolved. So because it's a set of conversations, you somehow associate a lot more with it than you would if it was just prose and written boring kind of a way. So I found that I find lots of interesting tidbits and conversations, but yeah, that's where I'll leave it at.
Well, that's a very interesting take on this. Now, not the answer I was expecting, but thank you, Deepak. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. And hope you had a good time here. And I can't stop recommending your book to people. And to everyone listening, please check out Moneywise. It's available on Amazon, Flipkart, and at your local bookstores. It'll definitely help you get your finances straight. It's a great framework. I personally loved it. In to the extent that I've been working in this industry in finance for about 5-6 years, and I still found a couple of useful tidbits. So it's not that basic even then, but it's a great read. Please read it, and do check out Deepak's work. It's on. You can find the Capital Mind website. He writes a great blog. I can testify for that also. So just in case if you want to check out financial stuff, that's the great place to go. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Siddharth, and all the very best to you and to everyone who's listening.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We are available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram, or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.